A few words on last week's conversation. We had Jean-François Gariépy, aka JF, conversation about the Jewish question. JF is an anti-Semite. I don't know if he self-identifies as such, but I've rarely found an anti-Semite describe themselves as such. I thought it was a good discussion. I'll go through some of the. It was triggering to many people. I got a fair bit of pushback, so I'll go over the feedback I got from people and talk on that a little bit, and then just share some reflections. If you're not watching this live and you're watching it after the fact, you can zoom forward or skip forward 10 or so minutes. And we'll be at the Israel-Palestine segment by then. So one of the critiques, and this critique I've gotten many times throughout the years doing these live streams, is that I shouldn't be platforming somebody like JF. I've gotten similar critique when platforming people even like Noam Chomsky or Norman Finkelstein or Yishai Fleischer, right? There's different people who have extremely problematic positions that people think shouldn't be platformed. So my opinion on that, generally speaking, is it's okay to platform anybody if you are going to push back and give a counter. Okay. So I think it's generally better to have conversations out in the public so people can see them. And that's better than just shutting it down. Most Jews actually don't truly understand anti-Semitism. They really simplify it as, oh, it's just blind hate. They just hate us for being Jewish. They don't really understand what drives it. In order to solve anything, you need to understand where it comes from. So I think bringing these conversations out to the forefront are essential to understanding them and working towards, I'm not going to say solving it, because I think all forms of group hate will exist, but moving towards a world with less of this group hate. If I were to just bring him on and not give any pushback and just give him free reign to share his views, then I would say that that's legit room for critique. So to me, it really comes down to, is there pushback? And ultimately, it's like, people watching that stream, is that more likely to make them anti-Semitic, or is it more likely to get them to question these quite common anti-Semitic positions? And I think the latter to be the case. So Connor writes, I feel you made him look a little silly. I would say you won the debate. So, I would agree. I think I made many more reasonable positions. And I think, generally speaking, people watching that would have their mind open to a new position and maybe question what is generally like, the anti-Semitic narrative. But, obviously I'm biased here. So generally speaking, everyone thinks they're making the more reasonable position. People who are anti-Semitic watching it would think JF won the debate. That's generally how it works. Another critique is that, and this is a tough one, right? I would have wanted the conversation to stick to anti-Semitism, but he pulled it over to racial differences, specifically race and IQ. And race and IQ is one of the single most controversial topics, because any test they've currently done, and I've looked at the studies, right? Any test they've done currently shows that there are differences. There are IQ differences between different ethnic and racial groups, which is unfortunate, right? Life would be so much easier if there were no differences. Now, there's a few things to do with this reality. One is deny it, say it's just not true, that all the data just is false. Another would be to recognize it to be true and then have that lead to being racist. And I guess a third alternative would say that that's true what the data shows, but there's problems in IQ tests and different cognitive tests that they give, and a lot of it is culturally dependent and socioeconomic dependent, and that is without a doubt true. Your cognition often depends on many factors. A lot of them are environmental. Some of the studies they do correct for environment, and they still show some discrepancy. Um, so I think the verdict is still out to if this discrepancy can be entirely bridged, given enough time of like maybe it takes a few generations of like being in a certain socioeconomic status and having a certain upbringing for it to fully balance out. But it very well may be that just there's different averages, right? It's like you know, there's clear physical differences between races to the point where you live life, you could notice that people look different. That takes tens of thousands, and in some instances hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to make these physical differences. To think that you're going to have such drastic physical differences and it's not going to have any cognitive or psychological differences, it's just that's not quite realistic. So the way I try to look at this is this very well may be a reality that we need to accept. And I think it's a reality that doesn't need to be flaunted, because some truths, when pushed, all they do is cause more harm in society. Now, this is not the same as saying that we need to intentionally hide a truth. I don't think that's the case. And this is, I think, where JF was struggling to understand my position. I said, I don't think it's a truth that leads to good societal outcomes. He said, yes, that's a Jewish position, hiding the truth. But there's a difference between hiding the truth and just acknowledging that a truth shouldn't be shouldn't be pushed. And I used an example of free will. Okay, let's say we can conclude without a doubt that we don't have free will, and I'm one who believes we don't have free will. It's actually one of the positions I'm most confident in. I do think, though, that believing that we have this free will, which we certainly feel like we do, and teaching that we have agency is one of the single best ways to build a thriving society. So I would never suggest that we teach in the classroom our lack of free will, because I think it would be net negative for society. That's not the same as saying we should lie and say that we have it. Now, when it comes to differences in race and ethnicity and IQ, I think that the way to look at it is, even if there's average differences, and there's average differences no matter what measurement you want to look at between any group, whether how much money they earn, what their interests are, their height, different genetic diseases, right? Jews, specifically Ashkenazi Jews, have are higher rates of certain genetic disorders. Maybe they would even discover that Jews have a higher rate at for some reason they're more likely to hoard wealth, right? Maybe this was caused by many years of oppression, that they're more likely to hoard stuff, and this is where the stigma that Jews are greedy comes from, right? Right? Like this very well might be the case. Different groups have some differences in their psychology. At the end of the day, the best way to approach this topic is to understand that no matter whether there's an average difference or not, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't tell you really anything about the individual. More than anything, and this is the solution to group hate, more than anything, you need to get to know people as individuals, because each individual is unique, regardless of the ethnic or racial group they come from. And if we could really build a world where the first thing we see is not what race somebody comes from, but them as an individual, and get to know them, this solves all forms of group hate. And at the end of the day, whatever the average difference is, the range within each group is so vast that it's not like you can't conclude much about somebody before actually getting to know them. So this is what this is really how I think we need to look at it. There are differences. All good. It says nothing about the individual. Let's meet people. Let's get to know them and make a judgment about them based on getting to know them. Seems to be the best way to broach this topic. But I do understand why it's triggering and very controversial. What else? Do I have any other reflections on the discussion? Oh, and then I got some feedback that I was maybe a little too easy on JF. I hear that. I always try to find the balance between giving good resistance, but also not trying to just like get these zingers in and trying to, get people like caught up on their words and like destroy people. Like that's generally not the approach I try to take. I try to really find a balance. Yeah, I could hear that. I do think, as I mentioned earlier, when you platform somebody if they have views that are problematic. It needs to come with resistance.